This is the best setup for the Huntress hands down. It uses a combination of Lightning Spear, which is a very well established AoE clearing build, with the massive single target from Primal Strikes. Primal Strikes absolutely melts bosses, and because it's a melee skill, it means that you're not fighting for room for gems like you would be if you're using Lightning Spear and Stormlance. So we're freeing up tons of real estate, and we're just using a better all-around damage. There's likely still room to optimize the build, but this is a really good all-around endgame setup. I've been clearing tier 15 maps with no problem. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let's get into the build. So I'm going to give you a basic rundown of how the build works, and then I'm going to take you into a tier 16 map with a bunch of annoying defensive stats, so you can see just how good the damage actually is. The Ascendancy you're going to want for this build is going to be the Huntress, followed by the Amazon. This is what the full tree is going to look like, but we'll get into that in a minute. And for items, this build is pretty cheap. You could probably make the entire build for under 1 div. Our gloves, Kitoko's Current, are listed for 1x, and you can probably get a decent pair for 15x or lower. My chest piece is Perfidy, and this one's listed for 1x. And same thing for the Lycos shield, but you're probably looking at closer to 10x. Then we just fill in with random resistances and other items. All right, let me take you guys into a map. Let's go for a boss map. So while we're clearing, it's pretty easy. We're just going to be using our Lightning Spear to kill everything. And I'll explain how this whole setup works a little bit later. Now keep in mind that these enemies have 75% increased health and they're evasive, and we're still killing them quite easily on a tier 16 map. Now I'm not going to waste too much time showing this to you guys, so I'm just going to skip to the boss. But as you can see, the AoE clear is perfectly fine because Lightning Spear is very strong. But I would say the main place the Lightning Spear struggles is on bossing. Also, if I seem slow, it's because this area is slowing me by 22% with temporal chains. Oh, perfect. We got a rogue Exile too. All right, let's do this boss. So I'm a little bit concerned because this particular boss has an attack that will one-shot me if I don't avoid it. Oops, so, okay, so here's the thing that just happened. He had electrocute on him, so I thought it was shock, so therefore I didn't reapply my shock after I burnt my shock, so I did damage way slower. But considering enemies here are from a tier 16 map and have 75% more or 74% more HP, I had temporal chains and enemies are evasive, I think you guys can give me a pass that he died in like a few seconds rather than, you know, a couple of hits. However, that does showcase why having the other pair of boots that I'm going to talk about is potentially a good thing. This is the better movement, speed, and defensive option, but there's a pair of boots that gives you much more offensive ability. And just as a redemption, I'm going to include a clip of me killing a different tier 15 boss, just so you guys can see the difference. Alright, so let's talk about how this actually works. So first off, we've got our Primal Strikes, which is our single target damage. Primal Strikes is a melee attack, and normally it will do 303% damage, which is still a pretty substantial amount of damage. However, if the enemy is shocked, we will also get Spirits, which is 563% damage, and we can shell these out really quickly. And the third strike will consume the shock, do 379% damage, and inflict lightning exposure, which allows us to do even more damage. Now, of course, consuming the shock can be problematic, but we can solve that in a couple of ways. One, the boots that I was just talking about are the Wake of Destruction. I actually prefer playing with these, but I know some people don't like the idea of having less movement speed, and this is also a slot where you're going to lose a lot of defensive stats, so you may be at a point where you can't really wear these. If that's the case, it's alright. That's what I just showed was the gameplay without them. And the only thing you need to know in that situation is that you can do two things. You can either use your Thunder Sleep, which we've set up to increase its critical strike chance by a ton, and also apply Shocking Ground on critical strike. This allows you to jump onto enemies and almost always shock them. And with the shocked ground, you can hit enemies as many times as you want, and it will never remove the shock as long as the shock ground is there. The other option is use your Primal Strikes twice, and then in between throw a Lightning Spear. Not only is this going to refresh any bonuses that you have that give you extra damage based off using a ranged attack, for example, the Pursuit support gem, but it's also going to potentially reapply the shock if you needed it, although you don't need it because with Primal Strikes, your spirits are also causing your enemies to continue to be shocked. As you can see here, it says refresh shock duration. So your shock will stay on enemies indefinitely if you never use your third hit. But it's not really a bad thing to throw in a Lightning Spear in between. Alternatively, you could just use all three and then Lightning Spear, and make sure you're keeping an eye to see if the enemy is shocked or not. Now, if you want to avoid all of that noise, you can just use the Wake of Destruction. These allow you to walk around and apply shocking ground wherever you go. The nice thing about this is, let's say this waypoint's an enemy. If you jump just beyond the enemy, it's going to apply the shocking ground across the enemy. So you can leap over an enemy, especially if they're in the middle of an attack animation, and then you'll be behind them, they'll have shock on them, and then you can turn around and kill them in like 1 or 2 hits. Almost every rare will die in 1 to 2 hits of Primal Strikes. But of course, Lightning Spear does the job just fine. But there are situations like with the proximity enemies where you can't kill them from range, so you may as well just leap onto them and kill them with the Primal Strikes. The other nice thing about the Wake of Destruction is for bosses, when the boss is spawning, you can literally just sit there and walk around putting the shocked ground anywhere around them. And then when they spawn, you can kill them almost instantly. If for some reason they move or the shocked ground that was under them expires, you can just dodge roll through them and you'll reapply the shock to them and then you continue hitting them. And this flows naturally into your rotations as you're avoiding enemy hits anyways. Now the key to this build is that we're using Critical Strike in order to gain more Critical Strike chance based off of our accuracy. So the more accuracy that we have over 100%, the higher our Critical Strike chance is going to go. And this is our base Critical Strike chance, which means it scales really well. And that's going to play really well into nodes like this. Falcon Dive gives us 1% increased attack speed per 250 accuracy. If I go into my skill here, you can see that my accuracy is very high, 9,381. And before I respec my passive tree, I actually had 14,000. Now you might have seen in the recordings that enemies were getting electrocuted. That's because we're using Kotoko's Current as our gloves. These gloves are really nice because we're able to apply electrocution to enemies, which not only is making us safer because enemies are getting zapped and stuck in place, but this is also increasing our damage because of electrocution. So enemies are taking 20% more damage just because they're electrocuted. The biggest area that this build struggles is with maximum life. So right now I only have 1600 maximum life and a little bit of energy shield. So my goal going forwards is going to be stacking more life. But other than the maximum life, we have a huge amount of block chance, a solid amount of evasion, a little bit of armor. With the correct boots on, we have all of our resistances. And then we're using the Perfidy chest plate, and this is giving us a 37% chance to avoid physical damage and a 34% chance to avoid chaos damage. This can go up to 40 and 40. Not only that, but we're also intimidating enemies, and intimidation is increasing the damage they take from us, as well as reducing the damage they deal to us. So we actually have a surprising amount of defensive stuff in the build. The scariest thing is AoE on the ground, so as long as you're cautious at avoiding those, you should be fine. But that's why we want to stack as much maximum life as possible, to avoid randomly getting one shot. Now I tried to minimize the build as much as possible. So we've got Primal Strikes, Lightning Spear. Technically we have a Raised Shield even though I don't really use it much. I've got Thunderous Leap, Sniper's Mark, and Spear Throw. The Spear Throw's there just in case we have enemies that take our mana, and this can actually do quite a bit of damage. Sniper's Mark we've only got as a way to get frenzy charges if for whatever reason you're not generating enough. I rarely actually use it. We've already talked about Thunderous Leap, but don't be afraid to use this as a defensive option as well. A lot of times I'll use this to get away from enemies that are cornering me. For my support gems and Primal Strikes, I decided to go with Concentrated Effect. You don't really need a large AoE because you're using it for single target, so this works fine. We're using Lightning Infusion, Primal Armament, Close Combat, and Pursuit. Keep in mind you need to use a ranged attack and actually deal damage in order to get this bonus. For Lightning Spear, we're going with Volt. Volt is kind of an important one to understand. So you can see in the top left, Voltaic Charge is at 30. If we use our attack, that goes to 0. And if we start moving, this builds up pretty quickly, and then we can use it again. So whenever you're in an area, you're going to want to move and throw your spear occasionally as you move. If you can time this perfectly so that you're always at 30, you're going to be getting a lot more benefit from it. But don't be afraid to spam it out in a moment if you really need to. However, usually it's more efficient to walk. I would say the main times I end up spamming is in the middle of a ritual or something like that, because sometimes your back's against the wall and you really just need to clear the enemies out, but it's still preferential to walk around and then throw it. So try and get a good cadence and maybe go around the edge of the circle and throw inwards as enemies are spawning. After that, we're using Twofold and Perpetual Charge in order to keep our charges up as much as possible, because Lightning Spear is much stronger whenever you get your extra lightning bolts. I'm also using Conduction in order to apply shock more easily. This is just in the situations that I'm using these boots. If I was using Wake of Destruction, I would change that out for a damage option. And then I'm using Deliberation for an extra 20% damage. And don't worry about the movement speed penalty, you really don't notice it. If I'm walking around, you'll see there's a slight slow in my movement, but you barely notice it because our attack speed's very fast. For Thunderous Leap, I'm going to put the full options of what I recommend here in the written guide, but right now I'm just using Bullseye, Pinpoint Critical, and Shocking Leap. Bullseye is increasing our accuracy, which increases our critical strike chance. Pinpoint Critical is increasing our critical strike chance, and Shocking Leap is giving us the shocked ground on crit. So all three of these are making our crit extremely high. You can see here it says 185%. I've noticed these tooltips don't seem to be accurate. I should probably take the time to understand what they're actually trying to show me here, because so far it doesn't make any sense from the math that I've done. But feel free to comment below and let me know exactly what I'm seeing here. But regardless, it's a lot of crit. You can see 185% is what's listed there, versus my Primal Strikes is listed at 125. For my Sniper's Mark, I'm using Ingenuity, Persistence, and Overabundance. These are really fluff. They don't actually matter, so don't worry about those too much. I really just use the Sniper's Mark very rarely, and I would say at this point, almost never. For Herald of Thunder, we're going with Innervate. This is going to increase our damage as we kill enemies, which is nice. And I like putting it here because anytime we're getting a benefit from Herald of Thunder is when we're killing a lot of enemies, because this doesn't happen when you're fighting a boss. So I like Innervate here so I don't waste a spot on my other things I would use in a boss fight. I've got Magnified Effect and Reach. These are both increasing the AoE, and honestly, I don't notice the accuracy loss from Reach, so don't worry about that. In Combat Frenzy, I'm running Profusion, and then I've got Cannibalism and Precision as just some extra bonuses there. And then I have Wind Dancer, which is actually a pretty nice defensive option. Sometimes enemies will rush you, and when they rush you and they hit you, this will push them away briefly, and that'll give you the time you need to survive. And I've also got Vitality in here just for some extra healing. When it comes to Cannibalism, Precision, and Vitality, all three of these are optional, but you really do feel good running Cannibalism, and I would go for Vitality over the Precision. Even though this is scaling our damage, Vitality is just a safer option. So you'll have to base that on how much spirit you have. Now, I talked about the critical strike from the Ascendancy, but let's look at the other nodes. So the first one I actually went for as I was leveling was Predatory Instinct, and this just increases your damage by 50% in random notches on the health bar of rare and unique enemies. So it really allows you to drop some bombs. We've also got Elemental Infusion, and this is going to help us with our AoE clear. And it's just extra damage that we're putting out as we use our frenzy charges. The chest piece in the build is not required, so technically you could, instead of going Elemental Infusion, build around Stalking Panther, but I'm not sure what way I would like to do that. Maybe possibly using some nodes in the skill tree that give you a combination of evasion and energy shield, but that would require you moving away from that. I think if you're going to go with that option, you probably need to skip out on going any critical damage nodes, which would mean skipping this entire section of the tree, skipping this, and that would free up some points. But then you would have to use the gloves that give you a set 300% critical damage, which means you would lose your electrocution buildup, and you would have to solve for how you're getting your frenzy charges. But that is possible. For example, you could use... I actually don't think I have one anymore, but the Dragon Helm, which changes your damage to do freeze buildup instead, and you could build around that pretty easily. And the nice thing about that is if your critical damage is set to 300%, I believe that allows you to use your Pinpoint Critical without losing critical damage. That's something I would have to check. But anyways, I'm going off on a side tangent. That's another option for the build. Now for the other 2 points, we're going into Penetrate. Penetrate is giving us increased physical damage based on the accuracy rating of our weapon. And it's 25% of that. So the cool thing with that is if you get a very fat increased physical damage percentage on your weapon, which mine is not, I need a better weapon, then that is going to allow you to also get a bunch of accuracy on the item. And then that accuracy is going to give you the physical damage you need in order to get scaled extremely high. Now you do have some options for the passive tree, but I'll kind of just talk you through what I'm doing and then maybe tell you a couple of options. So based off your points available, you can choose, especially early on, to go for some attack damage here, and you can skip on the attributes, but it depends if you need the attributes or not. I tend to need the attributes, so I lean on this side. This whole line here is not the greatest, but we do have a couple things worth picking up. We've got Cooked, which is increasing our critical damage by a bunch. And just since we're here, on a side note, my jewels, I'm going for Rage on melee hit, as well as maxed out block chance. Other than that, you can get some useful stuff like elemental damage or anything that kind of works, stun threshold. We don't have great physical damage reduction, so this node here helps a little bit, but we honestly avoid almost all physical hits, so it doesn't really matter that much. This node here is extremely useful. It's increasing the magnitude of our shock by 75% among these 4. And just so you understand that, shock does a 20% damage multiplier. This increases our shock from a 20% to a 35% damage multiplier. Here at our little split, we've got a bunch of block chance. This is going to make us take a little bit of damage from blocked hits, but we're getting so much block chance that it's really good. These nodes here are non-negotiable. You have to get these. So all of these spear nodes are extremely juicy. And these nodes up here are giving us both critical strike and accuracy, which is great because accuracy is increasing our base critical strike chance. And then we're getting a critical strike chance increase on top of that. I already talked about this node, but a bunch of accuracy for attack speed is very nice. Up here, we're getting damage with our Herald. This one's giving us that 20% damage multiplier with our Electrocute. These nodes here are extremely good. This one's got a base critical strike chance, which is very nice. And then we're getting chance and critical damage and a bunch of main stats too. Over to the left here, we're mostly grabbing these because we really need the dex, but it also is nice to have a little bit of evasion multiplier because you need a way to increase your base evasion. And if you have the points available, Falcon Technique is also very nice, but unfortunately it was nerfed, so we're only getting like 14% attack speed by going over here versus a bunch that we would have gotten previously. Moving up further from here, we've got some critical strike damage. These nodes are very juicy. We're getting lightning penetration. We're also getting critical strike chance against enemies with lightning exposure, which if you remember, we're getting with our primal strike automatically. This one is increasing our lightning damage by a more multiplier, so it's actual 15% multiplier, which is very nice. And then Endless Circuit, this one you would only run if you're running these boots. If you're running Wake of Destruction, you wouldn't even take this point because you're going to have the shock on enemies all the time regardless. We've got a little note up here for some extra critical strike chance. And then over here, we've got a bunch of stats, critical strike chance, critical damage, and this is actually 70% increased damage if we've dealt a critical strike recently, which is pretty crazy. Now, if you want to go a little bit more of a defensive option, you could skip some of the stuff at the top and instead come down this way. And this would allow you to pick up the extra block chance you need to cap out. And down here, there's a nice little node that gives critical strike chance and magnitude for our shock. And I think when I calculated this, it was about 4% damage that you would get from this magnitude on top of what you already have. So it's pretty nice, but I'm not sure it's worth it. And then again, pinpoint shot down here. This is a bunch more accuracy, but it really requires an investment to get down here. I was also considering Lightning Rod as my anointment. I ended up going with Storm Charged because it's 40% damage and 20% critical strike chance. I also considered going with Lay Siege because this would be 62% damage. If this one was just lightning damage with hits is lucky, it would be a no-brainer. 30%, I am not sure exactly how the math works out on that, but let me know what you guys think about Lightning Rod. Now for our items, I already talked about it a bit with the weapon, but you're going to want to focus on percentage increased physical damage, accuracy rating, and I like ranks to melee skills. You don't actually have to prioritize this because you don't get benefit to both your lightning spear and your melee skill, but I just love seeing bosses die instantly, so I tend to prioritize the melee. We've already talked about Perfidy, Kitoko's Current, Wake of Destruction, and Lycosidae. But for the other items, let's see what you want to prioritize. So I couldn't find a unique that I liked for the helmet, but let me know if you guys recommend anything. I just ended up using this as a spot to fill some of my defenses, as well as get some extra item rarity. For my amulet, I got accuracy, max life, spirit, melee skills, some cold resist, and some extra mana. I would prefer this be all resistance instead of cold resist. And instead of the extra damage taken recouped as mana, I'd probably rather have all attributes, but it's a pretty good amulet. For my rings, on this one I'm lacking a damage, so a physical damage or a lightning damage roll. But other than that, it's got the stats that I would prefer. And then this ring is missing maximum life, which is unfortunate, but again, still pretty good. On your belt, try and get extra charm slots. If you end up not having maximum charm slots, there is this node here where you can get an extra charm slot for only 4 additional points. So that is an option as well, especially if you need it only for a certain amount of time. For my charms, I like Stone Charm, Thawing Charm, and Golden Charm. I would say that a contender here that you could go for would be the ones that work for bleed, because we don't have a lot of armor, so I do feel like bleed actually hurts pretty good. Now, I feel like I've been talking forever and I probably forgot something, so if you guys have any questions, feel free to let me know. I've been really enjoying this build and I hope you guys enjoy it too. I'm going to make sure to continue updating the written guide, as well as upload new videos anytime I have any changes that are worth noting. So again, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in my next video.
Subscribe to Scream Heart. He's more than an old fart. He makes lots of fun builds. I promise his streams chill. He should probably be faster, Come watch this disaster.